Hi, everyone.
Hello. In the last segment, Ray was giving the example of Nancy Ewing, released after 20 years of imprisonment, mother of 4, who is being held up in 1979. You saw it in the thumbnail of our last video. Nancy Ewing's picture right on the front of the watchtower with the words "free" in bold. And what was the agenda of the watchtower in telling the story of Nancy Ewing but to say you should be like her? And of course at that time, 1979, the public ministry of Jehovah's Witnesses there was some wobbling going on. The 1975 disappointment and the idea that was held up for a little while that somehow there was more to ministry than just public evangelism, door-to-door ministry. And then of course they retreated from that. So the 1979 holding up of Nancy Ewing was part of an older pattern, and Ray gets into the next segment. Where did she get this idea from? Before we get to that, though, we forgot to do something last time.
Yeah, we wanted to compare this to the New Testament, because you don't do that when you're a witness. You hear a nice story like this, and you think, oh, how wonderful, how brave the sister is, and she was brave. But in the New Testament, do we see examples of people going to prison? Yes, we do. But who are the ones that go to prison? It's not the mothers of young children that are in prison. It's the apostles. It's the leaders of the church that you end up seeing being martyred or being thrown in prison.
Yeah, just consider the few examples we're aware of even as Jehovah's Witnesses. Peter and John get arrested in the first few chapters of Acts. Then Stephen, the first martyr, but he's not out there doing evangelism in the sense that you understand it as a witness. He's a delegate. He's actually been personally chosen by the apostles for a specific work. Yeah. That's why he's mentioned.
So they end up being ministered to by the congregation. So it's the prisons aren't full of disciples. It's the leaders that are in prison, and then the congregation are oftentimes the one that visit them or bring things to them, or the ones that were praying for Paul to be released.
And Peter in chapter 12, after James is the first of the apostles to be martyred, Peter is then thrown in jail, and the congregation are praying for him, apparently not expecting he'll be released when he shows up at the door, but they're praying for him.
Yeah.
So Peter again, and then later Paul and Silas are arrested.
Yeah.
And they're in jail, and something miraculous happens. And then you have mention, though, of women. You have mention of other, what we would call publishers. I'll just call them disciples.
Yeah, but what they were doing,
Dorcas
was ministering to the needs of other widows.
Lydia, too, who is held up for her hospitality in that very church of Philippi where Paul and Silas are thrown in jail. And so this pattern continues through Acts, where you can see consistently it's the leaders of the church that are being taken care of by the authorities.
Yeah.
So why is Nancy Ewing being held up here? Well, the emphasis of the Watchtower in years just prior to her arrest, Ray goes into that right after this. He says, she, Nancy, clearly believed that loyalty to God required her to go from door to door in spite of a law that prohibited not preaching, but preaching by that method. Her belief clearly resulted from what she was taught in the Watchtower publications. In fact, the year before her arrest, the Watchtower of July 1, 1955, page 409, in an article on baptism, said this, under the subheading, Requirements, quote, "It is expected of the dedicated one that he will uphold the cause of the Father, the cause of true worship, will preach in honor of the word and name of Jehovah God, will fully bear his responsibilities as a minister, a preacher in the field service, from house to house, and otherwise participate fully in the activities of the New World Society, to advance the proclamation of the kingdom and uphold the true worship of Jehovah. The dedicated one must be a house-to-house witness, as was Christ Jesus and the apostles, to the extent of his ability, and must otherwise be a witness and announcer of the theocratic kingdom of righteousness." End of quote.
Which brings us back to the real issue. Is this belief true? If it is, then all the suffering that resulted in Nancy Ewing's case and the suffering experienced in other cases for similar reasons may rightly be viewed as part of the suffering for Christ, a necessary sacrifice, and of small consequence when compared with being loyal to God and faithful to His Word. In that case, all the responsibility for the suffering experienced lies totally and completely with the governmental authorities, who took such harsh repressive measures. If, on the other hand, the view developed in the mind and heart of Nancy Ewing and in the other mother of four and in other Chinese witnesses, as well as in the minds and hearts of many others in other lands, is not clearly and unmistakably taught in the Bible, if it is instead the result of an organizational policy based on human reasoning, then serious questions cannot help but arise as to the degree of responsibility that rests with the source of that teaching.
Some may say that this case was something unusual, which it was, and that the attitude shown does not necessarily reflect the attitude of most witnesses. Perhaps not to the same virtually unquestioning degree, or with the same willingness to risk comparable losses. But nonetheless, thousands have experienced arrest and imprisonment simply because they felt under obligation to maintain that method of spreading their message in the face of contrary legal restrictions.
Even in those lands where a large measure of freedom prevails and where likelihood of arrest is remote, anyone who is or has been one of Jehovah's Witnesses must honestly admit that they have been taught that door-to-door activity is an especially vital part of their worship, virtually an essential evidence of their discipleship of Christ. They also know in their hearts that if they fail to engage in that activity with some regularity, they are viewed as spiritually weak by their associates, creating in many a sense of guilt.
Illustrating these points is a letter to the Watchtower Society written by a circuit overseer, in which he opens his heart on what he has seen in his area of activity. He states, quote, "This letter is being written after months of thoughtful consideration, many heart-to-heart talks with publishers and elders. I have prayerfully considered the problem and hope that I can clearly express its dimensions to the Society. Of the 25 or so elders I've spoken with in long, intimate conversation, only 2 haven't expressed feelings of guilt at not being able to live up to the objectives established for them by the Society," end of quote.
Along with the schedule of meetings and study laid out for them, the constant urgings to, quote, "set a better lead in the field service," he states, that many, quote, "feel they are under a constant strain to push, 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 with never enough time to do anything well." He goes on to say, quote, "Many have told me that past visits from circuit overseers have been far less than encouraging. They say the circuit overseer always comes in with the message to do more, more, more. How does this affect people who are already filled with feelings of personal failure and guilt?" One brother remarked, quote, "The circuit overseers have passed through the congregation like a motorboat making waves. After they leave, everyone's life is a little more unsettled." End of his quote. Another said, quote, "Their talks many times have the effect of beating a faithful and tired horse that already feels overworked."
I remember that feeling.
End of quote. Making clear that these are not simply the complaints of disgruntled or self-centered, self-sparing persons, the circuit overseer goes on to say, quote, "Some making these expressions are among the best qualified elders and publishers in the circuit." End of quote.
And Ray concludes this section this way: "Throughout the world, every elder and every ministerial servant, that is, deacon of Jehovah's Witnesses, knows that, along with attending meetings 3 times a week, involving a total of 5 individual meetings. I think that's been diminished in recent years. He must engage in door-to-door visitation with some degree of regularity, or risk removal from his assignment as being not exemplary. Because their time is limited, elders find themselves faced with sacrificing or putting off other things that in their hearts they may feel have higher priority, including family matters, spending time with their children, visitation of the ill, and similar activities. This can mean becoming like spiritual marionettes, responding when the strings are pulled by an external source. It is also undeniable that many witness women have felt obliged to keep on engaging in door-to-door calling despite the strenuous objections of non-witness husbands, knowing that to continue doing this could produce marital trouble and in some cases divorce. What then is the basis for this belief, one that causes witnesses to view participation in door-to-door work in a way comparable to that in which a Catholic would view attendance at Mass? I think I should make a note that even the lady that brought me to the witness fold, the lady who was part of our family and regular associate of ours, came over to Canada with us from England. Even that lady, after she got me involved in the Watchtower in 1970, her own marriage broke up.
Because he was a non-witness and...
Non-witness.
Yeah.
And was having drinking problems. And a few years later ran away, and more breakout of the family followed that. And one daughter stayed with the witnesses and the other one left.
Now we don't know what could, how much just this kind of aggressive witness work and all these meetings did to cause that kind of breakdown in a family, in a marriage. We've heard of other similar cases.
Many. And I should add that although that was the inevitable outcome, well, it was the outcome, not inevitable, but too common outcome of that situation. The people in our mix who weren't Jehovah's Witnesses admired her tenacity, her courage. She was very bold and very outspoken in her beliefs. But the payoff was the destruction of a family.
This quote from one of the elders about being beaten like a tired horse made me think of when I read Animal Farm the first time through. And there's in the animals, one of the hardest working is the workhorse, who continues to do his job on the farm, works and works and works. And I remember when I read it thinking, wow, I've lived this. This is sort of what it was like. You worry, and you don't even realize how much pressure you're under. Constant pressure.
Yes, indeed.
Until it's lifted from you.
Yeah, thank the Lord. In the next segment, Ray gets into the scriptural justification, the 2 texts that the Watchtower habitually uses to justify their door-to-door evangelism. The segment is called House to House and Door to Door. Are they the same?